Hello, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful day of chemistry. So today we're going to be talking about electrolysis. So this is going to be how we can use energy, specifically electricity, to drive unfavorable reactions forward. So we'll see a lot of the same reactions we have before, but in a very different way. So these are essentially driven through what are called electrolytic cells. So these are going to be cells where instead of getting energy out, we have to put energy in to make the reaction happen. So most of these electrolytic cells will possess a negative potential. So this negative potential will indicate the minimum amount of energy needed to drive the reaction forward. So let's go ahead and take a look at an old reaction in a new way. So let's say instead of trying to plate copper onto zinc, what happens if I'm trying to form zinc solid? So in this case, I might want to go ahead and turn zinc ions into zinc solid. So to do this, I need an electron source. So let's go ahead and use some copper. We're going to go ahead and oxidize copper into copper ions and use those two electrons to reduce zinc ions into zinc solid. So this will make a nice zinc solid that I can put on some object. But you'll note that when we calculate the potential, it will be the exact negative of the copper plating reaction. So this has a potential of negative 1.1 volts. This means that I have to put in a bare minimum of 1.1 volts to make this reaction happen. This will often come by putting in a battery or some other kind of electric source. So if I get this extra energy, I can start to drive this otherwise unfavorable reaction forward. Now, let's actually explain why we have electrolysis as an actual description for some of these energy consuming reactions. And it comes from a very specific set of reactions, because electrolysis is the energy input that can be used to lyse or break a molecule apart. The classic molecule that was broken apart was water, because it turns out water is present in all of our electrochemical reactions, because so far we're assuming that we're transmitting the electricity through water. So in this case, this will be a common background reaction for a lot of other electrolysis reactions, where you're lysing or breaking apart this water molecule into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. So we can go ahead and take a look at the two independent reactions. So we're going to be oxidizing water into protons and an oxygen molecule. This has a reduction potential of 1.23 volts, meaning that the actual oxidation reaction is negative 1.23, meaning this reaction does not want to occur. The reverse reaction, that reverse reduction reaction, is, however, quite favorable. On the other hand, we can then take those 4 protons and electrons we get from this first reaction and make it into hydrogen with a reduction potential of 0, because lo and behold, this is our standard hydrogen electrode. So this reaction is well known. Trying to oxidize water is a lot more difficult. So to try and determine the overall cell potential for this electrolysis reaction, we'll take the cathode reaction. So that's going to be our reduction reaction for forming hydrogen, minus the anode reaction. So that would be the reduction reaction for the oxidation of water. So again, that'd be 0 minus 1.23 volts with an overall potential of negative 1.23 volts. Yep, this reaction, not so favorable. And so despite the fact that hydrogen gas is often seen as a good source or store of renewable energy, it is actually fairly difficult to produce from water. You need to put in at least 0.123 volts of energy to produce that hydrogen gas. And it is worth noting that this is going to be the minimum amount of energy. So let's say I want to try and renewably produce hydrogen gas instead of using our current source, which is natural gas, which isn't so renewable. So in order to drive this reaction forward, instead of separating the system into 2 cells, it could actually be a lot more beneficial to put them into a single cell, because it is worth noting our oxidation reaction is producing these protons, which then are immediately consumed by our cathode, which is taking up these protons and electrons. So we're producing proton electrons here, consuming protons and electrons here to make the hydrogen gas. However, a very famous alternative would instead put a membrane here in between the two cells, again, still keeping them separate, but still allowing those protons to move from the left side of the reaction to the right side of the reaction. And it is worth noting, if I go ahead and try and drive this reaction forward with 1.23 volts, it may occur, but it's going to occur exceptionally slowly. And this is an idea we'll dive into a lot more in the next chapter of just because a reaction can occur doesn't mean that it does occur. And with such little favorable incentive to make the hydrogen gas, that's a lot to try and get those protons and electrons to go through all the work to break the oxygen apart and make hydrogen. So this rate is often unnoticeable. So one of the things you can do to make the reaction go faster is you can apply a little bit of extra energy. So essentially, as these electrons are coming off, if you kick them in the butt a little bit, they'll move a little faster and they'll try and make that hydrogen. So this extra energy that you're trying to put into the system is called an overpotential. So the overpotential is the amount of extra energy you need to make the reaction go forward at a noticeable rate. So for example, if I'm trying to split water, a lot of the best cells currently in use have overpotential somewhere around about 0.4 to 0.6 volts. So let's go ahead and try and apply this potential of 0.6 volts compared to the minimum energy required of 1.23 volts. If I add these together, it means I'd probably actually need to apply closer to 1.8 volts to make water into oxygen and hydrogen gas. So this would have a total potential of 1.8 volts. But remember, 1.2 volts of that is being stored as chemical energy in the form of hydrogen and oxygen. That extra 0.6 volts, which is 1/3 of the total, is actually just going to go into waste energy. So a lot of it will end up being generated as waste heat. So this reaction will produce a lot of unnecessary and useless energy that we can't end up using to drive forward our economy. So despite the fact that hydrogen gas is a very good way to try and drive our economy forward and rely less on batteries and oil, it's still a little hard to produce because of this inefficiency. However, one of the other cool things we can do with electrolysis is not just drive these reactions forward, we can actually monitor the rate at which these reactions occur by monitoring the current. And it's been a while since I've talked about this, but current is essentially measured in amps. And this is the amount of electrons being transferred every second. So let's go ahead and say I'm trying to do the electrolysis of water, and I measure a current of 1 amp. I can go ahead and convert this into a rate of hydrogen production using this 1 amp current and a series of unit analysis. So if I've got 1 amp, that's equivalent to about 6 times 10 to the 18th electrons being transferred per second. Well, for every 4 electrons I transfer, this means that I'm going to make 2 hydrogen molecules. All right. However, I don't want to figure out the number of molecules produced, so let's go ahead and go to the more convenient moles. So to do that, I need Avogadro's number, and I can go from molecules of hydrogen to moles of hydrogen. So it turns out if I have a current of 1 amp, I'd end up producing about 5 times 10 to the -7 moles of hydrogen per second, or about 5 micromoles of hydrogen per second, which, while not huge, if you scale it up to the minute level, starts to become respectable. So you can note there's a lot of ways we can use electrochemical reactions besides just measuring and producing energy. We can use it as storing energy, and we can use it to generate a lot of fairly cool species, whether it's a zinc coating on another metal surface or hydrogen gas. So next time, we're going to dive in a little bit more into this idea of energy storage and production as we talk about batteries. Until then, take care.